Beneath the relentless sun of a late July afternoon, the sidewalk outside my home had transformed into an impromptu canvas. An explosion of pastel strokes sprawled across its surface, a testament to my children's vivid imaginations. Swirls of cerulean met arcs of canary yellow, punctuated by the erratic geometry of hopscotch grids. My kids had been busy creating a wonderland of whimsy, each piece of chalk a magic wand in their tender fingers. Their laughter hung in the air, a sweet symphony of childhood. But to Karen, the self-appointed arbiter of suburban decorum, this was nothing short of an abomination. Her gaze, sharp and disapproving, was a constant presence in our neighborhood. The HOA was her kingdom, and she ruled with an iron clipboard. She had been watching since the first tentative scribbles began to appear, her lips pursed into a thin line that could slice through granite. The notice arrived with the morning mail, a crisp envelope bearing the unmistakable insignia of the HOA. Its contents were predictable, a curt declaration labeling my children's artwork as vandalism, a word that sat heavy in my hand, absurd in its gravity. Vandalism. As though innocence were a crime, the irony was lost on her. To Karen, rules were sacrosanct, etched in stone and immune to the hues of chalk. She was a monument to order, erect in her posture, her every movement a precise choreography of control. Her house, a gleaming bastion of beige conformity, stood as a testament to her unwavering commitment to the covenant. My initial response was silence, a quiet that rippled through our home, unsettling in its stillness. But beneath the surface, thoughts churned and tumbled, a storm gathering momentum. I would not let pettiness dim the light of creativity, not for my children. That evening, as the sunset bled through the horizon, I stood outside and surveyed the mosaic before me. It was more than just chalk on concrete. It was a narrative, a joyous rebellion against the monochrome rigidity that Karen championed, a kaleidoscope of dreams unfurling beneath our feet. The idea came softly, a whisper from the recesses of my mind. A national competition, a celebration of chalk art in its most raw and untamed form, the perfect counterbalance to Karen's narrow worldview, a chance to elevate what she dismissed as mere vandalism to something celebrated and revered. With a quiet determination, I began the process. Photographs were taken, capturing the brilliance of each color, the flow of each line, every image a defiant answer to Karen's claim. Carefully, I filled out the entry forms, my pen moving with an unexpected grace. It felt right, this quiet rebellion, a stand not just for my children, but for all that lay beyond the reach of HOA regulations. The days passed in a gentle blur, each one holding the promise of something more. In the evenings, I watched my children add to their masterpiece, their laughter a balm over the absurdity of it all. The chalk dust clung to their fingers, their faces alight with a joy that no letter could extinguish. I imagined Karen watching from her window, her world as neat and contained as a postage stamp. I wondered if she ever saw the beauty in chaos, the potential in every smudge and streak. Probably not, but that wasn't my concern. My focus lay on something greater. A chance to show my children that creativity was a force too powerful to be confined by lines on a map or lines on a page. And so, we waited. For the competition results. For the next move in this unspoken game. For the revelation that would eventually rise from the sidewalk and into the annals of recognition. The day after I registered my kids' chalk art in the national competition, Karen's campaign of pettiness cranked up a notch. It began with a note on our mailbox. The paper was crisp, folded with precision, and the ink was a shade of blue that seemed too cheerful for its contents. It was an official citation, demanding the removal of unauthorized decorations from the sidewalk in front of our home. The words "community standards" were underlined twice, as if repetition could lend them gravity. Karen had struck again. Her grievances were growing as wild as the ivy threatening to overtake her perfectly manicured hedges. I imagined her in her living room, wrapping herself in the rules and regulations of the homeowners association, a paper armor against the world that dared to color outside the lines. The neighborhood had its rhythms, and Karen's crusades were the latest melody. There was a time when the community was a quiet symphony of lawnmowers and distant laughter. Now, it was punctuated by the sharp notes of Karen's discontent. She had become a connoisseur of complaints, each new citation more absurd than the last. The day of the neighborhood meeting arrived, a chance for Karen to spread her gospel of conformity. The community center was a modest building, its walls lined with faded posters of past neighborhood picnics and seasonal fairs. It smelled of old coffee and a hint of desperation. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and as I sat among them, I could feel the anticipation in the air, like the tense silence before a storm. Karen stood at the front, her presence as commanding as a general addressing her troops. Her voice carried the stern authority of someone who had never colored outside the lines, her words a litany of rules and expectations. I watched her with the detachment of an observer in a play, her performance both mesmerizing and absurd. Gossip had already begun to ripple through the crowd like an electric current. Murmurs of vandals and negligence floated through the air, carried on currents of half-truths and assumptions. Karen spun her narrative with the skill of a storyteller, casting herself as the keeper of order in a world of chaos. I felt a flicker of defiance, a quiet flame that refused to be snuffed out by the weight of her disapproval. The chalk art, innocent in its inception, had become a symbol of resistance, standing against the monochrome uniformity Karen so fervently championed. As the meeting drew to a close, Karen's eyes met mine, a silent challenge hanging in the air between us. There was something almost theatrical about our standoff, like a scene from a play heading towards its climax. In that moment, I realized that this battle was not just about chalk or sidewalks. It was about the right to create, to express, to live in a world colored by imagination rather than fear. The room began to empty, the echoes of Karen's words still lingering like the fading notes of an unfinished symphony. Outside, the world seemed unchanged, yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. I felt it in the air, in the way the sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk where new lines and swirls of chalk art would soon appear. This was only the beginning. The days passed with a curious tension hanging in the air, like a subtle but persistent hum in the background of our lives. After my bold move to submit the children's chalk drawings to a national competition, I felt a strange mix of apprehension and defiance, a quiet rebellion simmering beneath the surface of our suburban facade. The sun rose each morning, casting long shadows that stretched lazily across our driveway. Those same shadows seemed to loom over the neighborhood, whispering secrets and spreading rumors. It wasn't long before the neighbors took notice of the growing buzz around our home. They watched with a blend of curiosity and skepticism, their gazes flitting between the familiar chalk-stained asphalt and the woman who had deemed it criminal. I found myself observing them as much as they observed me. There was Mrs. Jenkins, her garden gloves caked with soil as she pretended to prune her rose bushes. Her eyes, however, lingered too long on the chalk remnants outside my door. Across the street, Mr. Thompson paused mid-lawn mow, more often than necessary, his engine sputtering only partially drowning the whispers he exchanged with passers-by. Amidst this, Karen maintained her usual patrols, each step of her beige heels clicking like the ticking of a clock. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to measure the lengths to which she could stretch her authority. Her disdain for the art had not lessened. If anything, it had become a personal vendetta against the colorful swirls and figures that dared to challenge the monochrome order she treasured. The tension was palpable, a silent film playing behind each window's curtain. And then, as if on cue, the announcement arrived. A letter, elegant in its simplicity, addressed to my children, confirmation that their art had not only been accepted but celebrated. Their expressions, a blend of joyous disbelief and excitement, were enough to illuminate the entire street. The neighborhood buzzed with the news. It spread like wildfire, a spark catching the dry leaves of gossip. The mundane routine of the cul-de-sac was disrupted, replaced by conversations laced with equal parts admiration and envy. Karen, however, remained steadfast, her expressions carefully neutral, yet her silence spoke volumes. I watched her from my porch one afternoon, as she paused at the edge of her driveway, the sunlight casting a halo around her rigid silhouette. She stood there, contemplating the specter of her own making, a neighborhood alive with a story she could not control. It was a moment heavy with the irony of her own making, where the very vandalism she sought to extinguish now echoed with the laughter of children and the whispers of adults. In that pause, in that singular stretch of silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. I realized how powerless she truly was, not against the chalk that could be washed away with a hose, but against the idea that had taken root in the hearts of those around her. An idea that no amount of rules or regulations could erase. And, just as the moment threatened to linger too long, she turned on her heel, retreating into the sanctuary of her ordered life, leaving behind the chaotic beauty she had inadvertently nurtured. I watched her go, a small, satisfied smile tugging at my lips. A private victory in the quiet war of wills. The day of the community meeting arrived, a tapestry of tension woven with anticipation. The air was thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass and something else, an undercurrent of change. The community hall, usually a place for mundane discussions about weatherproof paint and permissible fence heights, seemed charged with the electricity of impending transformation. I stood at the back, my hands folded calmly in front of me, watching as neighbors shuffled into their seats. They whispered amongst themselves, a chorus of intrigue and speculation. The walls absorbed their murmurs, holding secrets like an ancient oracle. Karen, poised at the front like a self-appointed queen in a suburban court, wore her usual air of superiority. Her eyes scanned the room, seeking allies among the familiar faces. Yet tonight, those faces held a new kind of wariness, a cautious rebellion lurking beneath polite expressions. My heart beat a steady rhythm, a drum heralding change. The national competition had been the spark, igniting a fire of creativity and pride within our small community. My children's chalk art, once dismissed as vandalism, had bloomed into a symbol of unity and defiance. It had made waves far beyond our tidy neighborhood, a splash of color against a backdrop of conformity. As the meeting commenced, the usual motions were tabled: finances, maintenance, trivialities that seemed to fade into the background. I listened, nodding absently, my mind a careful dance between the present and the path ahead. Then, the moment arrived, unassuming yet pivotal. Karen rose, her voice a sharp instrument wielded with precision. She recounted her grievances, painting herself as a guardian of order. But there was an edge of desperation now, a quiver in her tone that betrayed her faltering grip. As she spoke, I felt the tide shifting. The neighbors, once neutral, began to exchange glances, silent conversations woven into the fabric of the room. The community was a living entity, awakening to its own voice, its own desires. I waited, patient and poised, until the time was ripe. Then, stepping forward, I presented the trophy, a gleaming emblem of creativity recognized on a national stage. The room fell silent, a collective inhale as eyes widened in surprise and admiration. The irony was not lost on anyone. What Karen had called vandalism was now celebrated art. The vindication was sweet, a balm to the soul. But more than that, it was a moment of transformation. The community saw a reflection of themselves in that shining trophy, a possibility of what could be, if only they dared. Karen's composure cracked, a facade crumbling beneath the weight of reality. For a moment, she was silent, a statue carved from hubris and stubbornness. But beneath that silence was a storm, one she could no longer control. The meeting concluded with an air of resolution. Conversations flowed, new connections formed amidst laughter and shared stories. The community, once fragmented by fear and rigidity, emerged as something stronger, more vibrant. I left the hall with a sense of peace, the evening sky a canvas of stars above me. The world felt wider, more open, possibilities unfurling like petals. My children's laughter echoed in my mind, a melody of hope and renewal. Karen lingered in the shadows, her influence diminished but not entirely gone. Her presence, a reminder of what had been, served as contrast to what now was. Yet even she could not dim the light of change. As I walked home, I realized that power was not in vanquishing enemies, but in uplifting a community. It was in the quiet confidence of knowing one's truth and standing firm in it. In that moment, I understood the true art of living. It was not in the absence of conflict, but in the courage to paint over it with beauty and resilience.